The Red Sea crossing is possibly one of the most fascinating miracles that God ever performed in the Bible, and people are still talking about it, still trying to figure it out, but many people are figuring it out incorrectly. Where did the actual Red Sea crossing take place, and what kind of evidence do we have for it? Well, we have a very fascinating guest today who's going to tell us more about that. It's Kevin Fisher. Kevin is the president of Ark Discoveries International. Welcome, Kevin.
Nice to be with you, Scott.
So the Red Sea crossing, where do people typically say it is, and why is that?
They usually say it's up at the Bitter Lakes, north of the Suez Canal area, but that's a relatively, and it really is, a rather shallow area for hundreds of thousands of soldiers to all drown, and there's no evidence found there. You don't find, chariots there. You don't find other artifacts. But the area that the late Ron Wyatt found is across the Sinai. If you cross the Sinai to the east, you find another body of water. That's the Gulf of Aqaba. And what Mr. Wyatt did, he suspected that could be the crossing area. And he rented a plane up at Eilat, Israel, the southern tip of Israel, the north end of the Gulf of Aqaba. And he asked his pilot, named Moses,
how fitting.
He said, Moses, do you know of an area through the mountains down here where the children of Israel could have come through and hit the beach? And Moses said, yes. And Moses flew him down to the Nuweiba beach area that has a wadi emptying out at that spot.
Now, wadi is
it's like a canyon. It snakes its way through the mountains. We've driven down it. It's like 30 miles approximately. You have these large mountains extending up from the roadbed through there.
And it's very narrow, is it not?
It gets narrow in places, yeah. It gets really narrow in some places, approximately 50 yards across maybe. But other areas it's wider. But Mr. Wyatt, so when Mr. Wyatt saw that, they then went down there on foot, and he went to the south end of the beach there. The beach is 5 miles long, 3 miles deep. The depth of it. So 15 square miles approximately of land area there for 3 million people. That's enough land area. So he went to the south end of the beach and he saw this column lying in the water that had been knocked down. And that same year, the Israeli army was occupying the Sinai Peninsula in 1978, and he showed it to them. They brought it back from the water, set it up in concrete, and it's a Phoenician-style column, approximately 16 feet tall, marking the site of the Red Sea crossing. Pretty incredible. And when Mr. Wyatt made it over into Saudi Arabia in 1984, he saw a matching column on the other side. And on that column in Hebrew, it said Solomon, Yahweh, water, death, Mizraim, which means Egypt, Moses, Pharaoh, and so he knew this was a marker telling about the Red Sea crossing site that had been erected by Solomon. Solomon's seaport was just to the north up at Eilat, Israel. So Solomon knew full well, 400 years after the event, that this was the location for the crossing site. And so the marker had these inscriptions on it. And when he showed it to the Saudi authorities, they got excited, but then later they came out and cut it down and hauled it away.
Of course they did.
On the Saudi side. Yeah, they don't want that Hebrew writing in their country. And so, but the column over on the Egyptian side, the inscriptions on it are eroded away. The backside of the column is eroded away because it was down in the water. But you can stand there by the column today and see this beautiful red granite pillar marking the spot where the pillar of fire and pillar of cloud also stood at one point. So after finding that column, Mr. Wyatt got his diving certificate and wanted to check the water out there. And through a series of dives, I think it was the first dive they actually went out, they found a coral-covered chariot wheel. Pretty incredible. And so subsequent to that, they found other chariot wheels. They even found a gold-plated wheel We're told in Exodus that 600 choice chariots and all the chariots of Israel were used. So the choice chariots would be those that were gold-plated. So there should be 1,200 gold-plated chariot wheels out there. They were able to locate a couple of the golden chariot wheels. No coral grows on gold, so it's better preserved. Now the other ones, coral did grow on them, but the coral helps to preserve the shape. You know, if you may have a bronze or a wooden wheel, the coral grows on it and retains the shape, so we can see it today. So by finding the chariot wheels, and then later he found a horse's hoof, a horse's remains, and then finding the remains of people, finding human femur bones that were coral covered. And so you have chariot parts, horse parts, people parts, all in the same spot. And so later Viveka Pontin, she went scuba diving over on the Saudi Arabian side. And she found a chariot wheel over there on the Saudi Arabian side. So you have matching chariot parts on opposite sides of the Red Sea crossing. So the parts continue to the other side.
Now this crossing site, this is on a, correct me if I'm wrong, it is almost like a land bridge situation where it looks like the silt from the Wadi Watir would have spilled into there many, many years over, and it's sand, and coral doesn't normally grow on sand.
It is rather smooth there. It is shallower there as compared to areas to the north or to the south. Now it is still deep. Now we're told in several places in the Bible that it was the great deep or the depths of the Red Sea. So it cannot be some places 50 feet deep or places 100. It's got to be really deep. And the site there, it is deep. It's 2,800 feet deep. But it's a 13-mile path across. And so when you calculate it, the grade was about a 4% grade that they had to go down and come back up, which is very manageable. And so, yeah, there is a path through the water for them to go over to the other side. God provided a way for them.
That is very interesting. So now the chariot parts, I know that these have been filmed since that time with Leonard Muller and others.
Yes.
They went down and took a robotic camera and took it down there and filmed all these things. So what we see on that film, that is different than what this other individual saw on the Saudi side then.
That's true. Yeah, multiple parties have found chariot wheels there, not just Mr. Wyatt. Bill Fry found chariot parts, Aaron Sin, Ross Patterson, Viveka Pontin, Leonard Moeller, part of the Tim Mahoney team, and patternsofevidence.com. They're creating a film. Their second film is going to be on this Red Sea crossing site, which leads over to a new location for Mount Sinai, which is Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia, which is a totally new thought to most people. But that has to be over there in Saudi Arabia, because that's where Midian is. Midian is the location for Saudi Arabia. The real Midian's location for Mount Sinai there in Saudi Arabia, compared to the Sinai Peninsula where the traditional Mount Sinai is located. So the Mount Sinai has to be over in Saudi Arabia, and this Red Sea crossing brings the children of Israel directly over to Saudi Arabia, the correct spot, and so it all adds up.
And so this has been found by many, many people. It's not just Ron Wyatt, because I know a lot of people question his credibility just because they like to do so. But it's been proven by many, many other people.
Yes.
So this has got to be it.
Yes, it really is. And more people are figuring this out. The editor of the Biblical Archaeology Review, Herschel Shanks, he stated in Newsweek magazine that Jebel el-Lawz in Saudi Arabia is the real site for Mount Sinai. So again, more credibility for the Mount Sinai, more credibility for this Red Sea crossing. We think this is the correct location.
All right, well, we'll save the Jebel el-Lawz for another time. We want to get into that next. Okay, so Ken Fisher, thank you for joining us today, and if we want more information from your group, it is arkdiscovery.com, correct?
Thank you, yes.
All right, arkdiscovery.com, check it out, and you'll find out all about these interesting discoveries from the Bible and get the true story. So Ron Wyatt, way back in, gosh, the 70s, Ron was looking into the mysteries of the Bible as we now find commonplace on places like the History Channel and Discovery.
Sure.
And he was really the pioneer in all of these things. How did it start for him?
Okay. Well, he had seen a 1960 Life magazine article about this boat-shaped formation in the mountains of Ararat, there in eastern Turkey. It was spotted by a Turkish army captain, Mr. Durpınar, and in 1959. And so this group, mainly from the USA, went out there to explore the site, and Life magazine reported on their time out there. They saw the boat-shaped formation. Half of them thought it was a natural formation. The other half thought, hey, this has got potential. But it sat there, for 17 years without anyone else going out there. And so Ron Wyatt started thinking about going out there and investigating the site. But before he went anywhere or did anything, he had a burden for souls. And he prayed to the Lord, Lord, help me find something that will help someone get to heaven. This wasn't about, Lord, help me find something so I can get rich. It was about doing the Lord's work and helping someone get to heaven.
And that's the way everyone describes Ron Wyatt.
That's right.
Now, Ron Wyatt, for those of our audience who don't know, he was an amateur archaeologist. He was not a professional archaeologist who worked for some big organization or anything like that.
That's right. And the disciples were not professional theologians
Good
either.
point. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so God will use the humble to confuse the wise. And so God chose him. Ron went out there in 77. And he didn't know exactly where to look for this boat-shaped formation. He had 3 days in the area, because it's a 5.5-day trip out there, and then 5.5 days back, using his 2-week vacation from work. So, like most of us understand. And so he and his sons knelt down and prayed, Lord, help us find this. They had rented a taxi to drive them around.
Now, this was in 77.
77.
So no one else from the Western world had been out to this area. This is, first of all, where are we talking about here?
This is in eastern Turkey, next to the border with Iran.
Okay, so I'm assuming that that the folks in that area, that it's a local legend, if nothing else. They knew about this thing.
The villagers there's a village right near the site. They believed that was Noah's Ark, but of course the word hasn't gotten out, properly, or people don't believe. So they prayed that God would stall their taxi where they needed to look.
They actually prayed
They prayed for, divine intervention.
Okay.
And so the taxi starts driving around, and all of a sudden, the taxi stopped, quit running. The driver's confused, but Ron and his sons are excited.
Huh.
And they jump out and put a pile of stones there.
Okay.
And they get back in, the car starts up, and they start driving again. So this happened 2 more times that day.
So this thing, now, did they pray for, maybe you don't even know this end of it, did they pray for that the taxi would stall something specific, or something would happen?
Well, they were in the taxi, and they prayed that God would intervene and help them find it.
Okay.
Okay, so anyway, the taxi stalled 3 times, and so the next day they went back to these piles of stones, and they walked directly out from them. And there is Noah's Ark. There are these sea anchors that hung from the ark to help keep the front pointed into the waves. And then the remains of what appears to be Noah's house or some building associated with Noah. So God directed them to these sites. And these were things that Ron later investigated. And of course the Noah's Ark site was deemed Noah's Ark National Park with a visitor center. And
wow. Well, we'll get into that. We want to save some of these details. We want to give away all the...
So God was using him.
Yeah.
Okay, and God could tell, Ron could tell God was using him, and the next year, then, he decides to start looking for the Red Sea crossing site.
Now, what possessed him to do this type of thing? Is it just a divine...
I think God puts ideas in people's minds.
Absolutely,
If you're in connection with God, he puts thoughts in your mind. So he got the idea the next year, to look for the Red Sea crossing site. And so he went to the Gulf of Aqaba, to the northern end of Gulf of Aqaba is Eilat, and they rented an airplane to look along the eastern edge of the Sinai Peninsula for an opening through the mountains.
So now this is, nowadays we have movies like Patterns of Evidence, you know, a modern documentary that was just done, and all these other, you know, like we said, the History Channel, Discovery Channel, but this is in what, 1980?
Well, 78,
78,
yes.
so this is before any Westerner had dared stick their neck out and look for these things.